Hi everyone, this is Jason Burek of Wall Street from Main Street and Eric Dubin. Welcome back to another Welcome to Dystopia podcast. This is episode number 5. Today's special guest is the chairman of GATA, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. He also runs the website Le Metropole Cafe, and he's a former NFL wide receiver, and he also has traded commodities for a long time. Bill Murphy, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here, Jason and Eric. Thank you.
Now, Bill, everyone asks you about precious metals, and I do want to talk about precious metals, but you also in your newsletter cover a lot of macroeconomic topics. So I want to get your opinion on what's going on in the global economy. Is there any market, in your opinion, that's not manipulated?
Well, you've got a lot of other people outside of the GATA camp all of a sudden saying that's the case. When it's people like Bill Gross and other people that, are coming out outright saying that, the global markets and U.S. financial markets are manipulated and based on the fines paid by the bullion banks and the currency market, the LIBOR market, I think the oil market, the mortgage market. What market isn't manipulated these days? And that's starting to catch a lot of attention from a lot of mainstream folks.
Yeah, it seems like all the major economies, so China, Japan, the United States, Europe, England, seems like they're all hell-bent, these central bankers and politicians, these central planners, on manipulating the major markets, asset markets in those countries. So the United States, they're manipulating basically the general stock market. They've manipulated the bond market and interest rates. Japan is buying, their central bank is buying ETFs, massive amounts, and they're also the buyer of last resort for their government bonds. China has, obviously stepped in the last month or two to try to stop a market crash, changing all the rules, punishing short sellers. So there's massive amounts of market intervention there in addition to the central planning. And Europe is massively manipulating their bond market, I guess, to try to prevent interest rates from rising as well.
Yeah, it's pretty much, that's the general scenario. You got it right on the money.
Even in the United States, we haven't really formally ended QE because we reinvest all of the bonds that come mature in the Federal Reserve's balance sheet as well as the interest to repurchase bonds. It's kind of like a clandestine QE program.
But Eric, they don't talk about that on CNBC, so it can't be true.
You mentioned Japan too, and it's worth pointing out that for many periods, like duration of longer than a month, the Bank of Japan actually would purchase 100% of the bond issuance in Japan. I mean, that's how crazy QE is there.
The demand in the private sector for bonds is super saturated, to use a scientific term. I mean, there's no more demand really for bonds in whether it's Japanese corporations or Japanese banks or the Japanese citizens. They're tapped out, and yet their debt, their principal on the debt has risen, so they have to sell even more bonds.
Yeah.
Welcome to dystopia.
Well, as Alan Greenspan said, gold is the barometer of the financial system, and all of this craziness would not be possible were it not for the fact that gold is so aggressively manipulated and silver in turn to help keep the manipulation in gold going. And I don't think there's any organization in the world that has done more to try to document the follies of this manipulation than GATA. And, Bill, you've been at this for more than 15 years now. When you look back, GATA has had some success in waking up a lot of people. Obviously haven't won the war yet, but many battles along the way have turned out positive in the sense that there's a lot more people awake. When you look back and see where things are now, how far do you think we have to go before we reach some kind of critical mass? I mean, I've always thought that basically nothing's really going to change until we have a crisis big enough that so many people fall on their butts and then begin to look around and say, who did this? Why did it happen? And then at that point, there's a possibility that we'd have some positive change. Do you think we have to wait until there's a crash before something positive develops in terms of reforming this insane level of manipulation and everything?
I think you have it exactly right. I mean, I came to this conclusion last year that, GATA's done pretty much all it can to expose this stuff. It doesn't mean we're going to stop and we're going to keep documenting it, of course, but I mean, from where we started, I mean, to think that the press would still not even want to mention GATA or get into the gold issues. I mean, after all the stuff that my colleague Chris Powell sends them, they just won't touch it. And the gold companies, silver companies, they're not going there. It couldn't be more obvious. It's ruining the companies. And while there's greater understanding of all the markets, you got the gold industry. I mean, the World Gold Council is a joke. And so, yes, I think it's going to be the biggest financial scandal in U.S. history when things blow up, as you're talking about, and people are going to want to have answers. How could this have happened? And part of it will be, and specifically, the rigging of the gold and silver prices, for the reasons we've discussed so often about how it has to do with the dollar and interest rates and confidence and all that sort of thing. I mean, anytime the gold price soars, it's always something bad for the money and power. And so I made this decision to crush the prices, to, again, as you say, talk about the barometer that Greenspan mentioned, that everything is really fine. Just look at the calm gold price and the heck with all the QE and everything else. So it's a big picture story, and yes, I think it's going to be huge, and all our efforts are going to pay off, but not until the markets blow up. And when they do, again, people are going to want to have answers.
Yeah, Bill, I don't think the mainstream media wants to talk about gold and silver being manipulated because they're too busy congratulating these Wall Street Journal article writers and other people that gold is the new pet rock. That seems to be the sentiment, the mindset now is, they bring on all these investment bank analysts that continually put out, and it's been this way, I guess, since 2011, continually negative research reports on gold and silver, on the miners. And now, we've reached the culmination point. I guess we've probably hit peak negativity on gold, where someone comes out with an article saying it's a pet rock, despite, thousands of years of history, that it's not a pet rock.
Price action makes market commentary, one of my favorite sayings. And of course, now it's in abundance everywhere, as you're saying. You can't, it's one negative story after another in the press. And it's exactly what the gold cartel has GATA calls and what they set out to do. And at the moment, they've achieved their objective.
Yeah, it's MOPE, as Jim Sinclair says, management of perception economics. And if there's a lot of truth in the scandal or something like that, they put on some celebrity news or they change the subject matter, and most people don't pay that much attention anymore or don't think that long term. So if there is one of those banking scandals, like you mentioned, how, all these 5 major investment banks were manipulating currency markets, heavily fined, no jail time for any of these guys, and a day or two later, they're not even talking about it anymore, and it's as if it never happened because the mainstream media is not even talking about it anymore.
That's exactly correct, and it's a real sad state of affairs. And I said eventually, when things really get affected because the barometer is not working, then the public is going to want to demand answers, and then because the public will demand those answers, the press will be forced to go to GATA, and that's the way I think it'll play out.
My question for you is, you traded commodities for a long time. How did you find out that gold is manipulated?
Well, as I said, I was a limit position trader at one point and had a lot of experience in the market. And when I opened up the Metropole Cafe, my website, in September of 1998, long-term capital management blew up a few weeks later. And we had heard they were short, or their clients were short 400 tons of gold. And the bullion banks got together. I could see on a daily basis the prices being stopped at 300, and certainly the bullion banks would all come in and stop it and bring it back, and it happened over and over again. And then it was just clear as a trader it wasn't trading right. So I began to complain about it and write a thing called Scumbag Gold. And again, it was clear to me, and Chris Powell was a subscriber to my website and said he was tired of me complaining about it. He said, let's do something about it. He had antitrust experience in the newspaper world, and so we formed GATA. But it was very clear, and we kept pounding the table, and then the Bank of England announced that silly sale of half their gold, announcing it in advance and to get the lowest price possible. And that brought a lot of people like James Turk and others that are well known in the gold world to say GATA's been right all this time.
Now, there's a lot of interesting views on the gold market. One of them is Martin Armstrong. He says, based on the technical action, which I think the tape is painted. You're a trader, though. You've been around markets more than I have looking at charts, so you could comment better than me probably if you think the tape is painted. But what's your opinion of Martin Armstrong and his views on gold?
Well, for some reason, this guy was a brilliant guy, but spent 11 years in jail, which many murderers don't get. Which is astounding, and got out of jail in September of 2011, right at the top of the gold market. I don't know whether it was coincidence or not, but ever since then, he has gone bonkers on what against he calls the gold promoters, which I guess he can throw myself in that camp if he cares to. I mean, and I mean, there's not a week that goes by these days which he doesn't talk about it, and then gets into immediately going that the market is not manipulated. And, you know, that's his opinion, but good grief, as we just discussed, I mean, all these other markets, it's recognized in billions and finds that markets are all manipulated. And gold and silver are the only two markets not manipulated? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. So whether he got out early to get on the case, I don't know. He's got a cult following, as you say, and he's been calling the market right of late, you know, in terms of being bearish. We think he's got a lot of help behind it. I mean, look at the bashing a couple of weeks ago on a Sunday night with nobody around, and gold's taken down $50 in seconds and minutes. And I mean, these kind of things just don't occur in other markets this way. And it's you know, when nobody was around. And so we've collected enough evidence otherwise to show that the gold market is manipulated. And as we've just discussed, it's now being recognized that all the markets are manipulated. So if Martin Armstrong is correct, gold's the only one that's not manipulated.
Yeah, and Martin, I saw on his website, and he admitted this, and I saw this in one of your newsletters, he also has tapes on market manipulations, and, you know, he was supposedly asked to turn them over, and he had the court documents saying he was asked to turn over these tapes from a whistleblower where he had interviewed as a journalist, saying the banks were manipulating all these different markets. So his views really confuse me. I mean, I won't deny the last 4 years or so, he's had a great track record, and the man has made a lot of money with market calls. But there's a lot of people out there now who act like he doesn't make a mistake at all because he's had a good, you know, 4-year run or something like that. So it's very, his views are also, I used to read his newsletter quite a bit, his views are confusing. So he'll say how much he hates the government, but yet he'll make fun of people who like gold and libertarians and people who like the Austrian School of Economics and stuff. So I don't know how he can hold all these different views together. They're conflicting views that to me don't make a lot of sense when you say, you know, one thing and it conflicts or contradicts something else.
Well, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I mean, just to give him one other example, he's a prime advocate for the government to issue bonds rather than any form of taxation and to just print bonds out of thin air, so to speak, to fund the government. You talk about something that's antithetical to a libertarian perspective. You can't get any more worse than that when it comes to, you know, financial policy. The guy is a walking contradiction. And Jason, you mentioned that he's done some pretty good calls in the last 4 years, but that's kind of overstating his track record. He's on record now as saying, you know, we are smack in the middle of the crisis window and that everything's going to, you know, at some point fall apart in the financial markets. Well, 2 years ago, he was talking about the crisis window not starting until 2016-17. And people just don't have the historical memory for what pundits and analysts make in terms of their calls. And when a cult following along the lines of what develops with Martin Armstrong, people just don't look objectively at people as sources rather than cult figures, and it's most unfortunate.
Well, I guess the world, guys, unfortunately, and this is like has to do with our society now and our culture and, you know, Twitter and all these social media things now, that this is a what have you done for me lately, you know, instant minute-to-minute thing can change. So, I mean, you know, people that have been right for a very long time, maybe the last couple of years they haven't, but they have a whole, you know, decades-long career of making good market calls, and, you know, now people are turning on them. So, like, I just read the comment section underneath our videos and underneath other people who are libertarian or alternative media, you know, they're bashing Eric Sprott, who's, you know, built a business since 1980. He's done a very good job. He's a very successful businessman, built many successful businesses. And, you know, they turn on him and call him names, and not just Eric Sprott, but so many other people in the gold community where, you know, these are all, in my opinion, manipulated markets. I agree with you guys. I think basically every market is manipulated for the most part. I mean, maybe there's some individual companies out there that are not manipulated, but with high-frequency trading and stuff like that, it's so much easier to manipulate a market now with these algorithms than pretty much it's ever been in history. I mean, you don't even have to be at your computers now. You can just write a program, and you can go to the beach and have your computer program manipulate the market for you.
Don't give Janet Yellen any ideas.
You know,
Okay.
in that regard, it's real quick. You know, it didn't happen today, but it's happened like 13 out of 15 days. Around 3 a.m. New York time, the gold traders go to work and stop any advances, and you can see it on the chart day after day. So that's where these systems come in, as you're talking about, and it's quite something to see how they put this into action.
Yeah, that's a great subject actually to dive into in more detail, because our listening audience, there's a lot of people that are followers of the precious metals market, but we always have a lot of other people as well too that would not know, for example, Bill, your thesis about the Plan A, Plan B, Plan C time of attacks, and how historically you can just look at this, and from a statistical probability point of view, that information alone proves that there's manipulation. And in fact, the academics, the husband and wife team, Metz, I believe was their last name. I forget. They're out of New York University. They did a study and documented that, in fact, when you look at since 2004 to 2013, if I remember their data set period correctly, they documented and was published in Bloomberg that the probability of these periods of attacks suggests outright manipulation. Why don't you talk a little bit about the Plan A, Plan B, Plan C setup? People, I think, would find that pretty interesting if they haven't seen it before.
Well, a lot of us may look at it a little differently, but I mean, from my standpoint, the Plan A one is what I call Plan A, when they attack again at around 3 a.m. New York time when their London traders go to work. I mean, it's constant. The Plan B used to be, or it still is, but not used as much after the PM fix, where the physical pricing is over for the day. And there's a certain amount of limits that our colleague of ours has noted that he can circle the price of a day what gold is liable to go up the next day, and they have stopping it going up 1%, and sometimes they do it to the tick. One of the things that see all the time, gold never goes up on good news for the gold market, what people would think is good news. It's always stopped, checked, or sent right back down. In other words, they don't want what news is bullish to be bullish for gold to be associated with the price. So they do that by muting the price action to the upside and take it away from what's really going on. So they have certain kind of routines and drills and that they constantly use, and it's monitored by our people. And of course, they've been doing it in spades the past year.
We even see that today when we're recording. The Plan C being, COMEX normal trading is closed, and in the Globex session, when it's more thinly traded, we have attacks Monday and today, August 4th, as we record.
No, that's exactly right. Gold went down $5 after the COMEX closed, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because these kind of things go on constantly, and that's why the price is in the weeds here.
Well, COMEX is just a paper market anyways. I mean, there's hardly any metal to deliver. It's not really meant for delivering metal. The LBMA and the Shanghai Gold Exchange are meant more for actually delivering metal. The other one's just meant for hedge funds to do paper trading, and it's mostly cash settlement, if that. But one thing I heard, Bill, you talk about these plans. I have some Wall Street floor trader contacts. Greg Manorino told me about this too. He used to trade on different exchanges in New York City. He told me that a lot of traders, professional ones, off the record, they won't go on CNBC or Bloomberg and talk about this. But he said, at cocktail parties and talking with their buddies off the record, he said they'll admit that the paper markets, gold and silver, are manipulated, but he said they piggyback those trades. So he said they short those things, they jump on the trade and short those things all the time too, after they see the manipulation algorithms and things like that. So they jump on them and short the paper market, and then he said they buy metal with the profit because they know how scarce the real metal actually is.
Well, yeah, you can get mentioned earlier, the gold cartel stops a trade from happening, and all they have to do is prevent it from going higher. And just as you say, then the traders see what's going on and jump on the short side of the trade, and then the bad guys can cover on the dips. And so if a market that can't go up, won't be allowed to go up, is going to go down, and that's what we've been up against for a long time now. And we'll need some sort of black swan event, or something that's going to overpower the gold cartel's abilities to suppress the price. And then when we get a move, it's liable to be extremely violent to the upside.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen, what's going to end this manipulation, or at least force them to retreat and maybe defend at a higher level, is there's going to be physical shortages at some point. Probably in silver first before in gold. because, you know, silver is used for so many more industrial things, and they're putting on a lot more solar panels and electronics and things like that. But, you know, this market in terms of fundamentals, I see physical demand for gold and silver, especially globally, you know, not here in the Western world, but demand globally is still rising for both. I mean, India has enormous demand for silver. They bought up a humongous amount of silver, and a lot of gold is being exported to the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So we see demand is rising globally. We see supply problems. I look at the miners' balance sheets. They're a disaster. My contacts, Bill, in Toronto and Vancouver tell me there's really no more capital available for most of the miners. So we're at the stage here, the critical point. We're below 1,100 gold for the most part, and silver, you know, we're below 16. I don't know how they can keep these mines running because they're running at such big losses. So, and they can't sell any more equity or debt. What do you think is going to happen with your experience with the miners here? Are we going to see a supply crunch coming up in the near future?
Well, from what I know, that's going to take some time to, you know, to come into play. Some of the people, you know, I mean, if you look at the Canadian gold price, you know, it's about $1,400. Some of these miners, I mean, nobody's doing great, but I mean, they can survive with prices like that. The United States, specifically, is getting just wiped out, slaughtered. But so, I don't know. I mean, when it comes to silver, I mean, I have stories from dealers that buying it in size is incredibly difficult, and they expect to have an absolute price explosion this fall. There is absolutely no sign of that in the way the price is acting. It's the worst thing, and it's been this way all year I've ever seen. But as you're talking, what can happen is they can hit the wall all of a sudden, and then, especially in silver, all of a sudden it disappears. And the only way we'll know that is when all of a sudden the price has been up $1.50, $1.75, and then you get followed through on the next day. The price has got to tell us they hit the wall. Right now, there's no sign of it, but that's what I hear is building.
Now, where do you think this metal is coming from? We had China recently announce gold reserves, and they were underwhelming. You know, we can discuss maybe theories why China announced a lower amount of gold. One theory I've read from the Small Gold guy, Lewis, over there, I don't know if you guys know him, over at Small Gold, SMAULGLD. But he thinks that China has put the gold, instead of just at their central bank, People's Bank of China, they put it at, you know, all their larger commercial banks, and they put it in different places, so to say that they don't have to have all these gold reserves, and at their sovereign wealth funds. But I don't know, it seems to me that China may be, you know, hedging its bets, so China doesn't piss off the U.S. too much, that China intentionally underreported the gold because they didn't want to piss off the U.S. and because they wanted to continue, they know gold's manipulated, and they wanted to continue to accumulate as much gold as possible, maybe take most of the gold from the rest of the other countries. Is that kind of the same page you guys are on, or do you guys see things differently?
I think that both things are right. I think that's probably a Chinese objective. They think much bigger picture, longer term. And I think that they've accumulated, I mean, just based on the reports we've seen over the past number of years, it should be in the range of 3,000 to 4,000 tons, or probably closer to 4, maybe more. But so I think they placed it in different accounts.
There's something that we can conclude with just basic logic. The first and most important point is that in order for China to have accumulated all of the gold that's been flowing through the Swiss refineries, which is documentable, and all the gold that's been documented through United States exports as reported by the Commerce Department, if memory serves, I think that they're the ones that produced that report. I mean, all of these, the changes in the GLD vault and the documentation proving that traders and JP Morgan and other firms were doing an arbitrage game back in 2013 when the vaults were beginning to be aggressively raided, and all of this, you know, movement again through the Swiss refinery system, transforming 400-ounce bars to kilo bars for the Chinese market, on and on and on. It is a documented fact that there's been an order of magnitude of movement of gold that could not have been supplied by the overall market. It has to have been coming from central bank dishoarding. And if you operate with that as a premise, which is very well documented, that leads to the obvious conclusion that there has to have been some kind of coordination and agreement amongst the United States policymakers and China to let, as Jim Rickards talks about China catch up in terms of gold relative to the size of their GDP in comparison to the United States. But early this year, I put out the forecast that China was going to come out and make their declaration in July, and that I assumed that they would want to be above Germany, but not aggressively so. So they would come in under 4,000, and maybe 3,500 is what they would declare in terms of their tonnage ownership. But it appears that they backed off a bit because they want to play nice a little bit longer, because it allows them to get a better position within the IMF when it comes to the political negotiations vis-a-vis the United States, as opposed to the angle and operating assumption that I was working with when it comes to making the market gain more confidence in their financial system with them having a larger pile of gold. They appear to have backed off on that as an operating objective and went for trying to play nice with the United States, and that also has the benefit of keeping the gold price down further so that they can accumulate more. The Monday following their announcement, late Thursday evening into Friday morning, had another raid along the lines of 2 minutes before the Shanghai exchange opened. A huge amount of gold was sold. I think it was like $2.4 billion notional value of gold sold in 2 minutes, which crashed the market down $50 and crashed the technical signals that basically gave all of the copycat hedge fund traders and whatnot that follow the cartel the excuse to continue to piggyback on with more selling. And here we are. We're now, literally like in the last couple of days, of trading days, recuperating from that latest attack. So it's pretty clear that there's a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiations and game playing that's going on when it comes to coordination between the United States and China.
Yeah, Eric, you did a really good job on the timing aspect, but I mean, there were so many different estimates across the board. I thought they would come out with a higher number, but now in hindsight, it makes sense for why they lowballed it. Yeah. In terms of accumulating more physical gold, and then also, maybe the U.S. has been changing the terms on, because the U.S. controls the IMF still, on the conditions of China's RMB being added to the SDR basket.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's, obviously, we're in public. We're probably not going to be told a lot of the details of the conditions for China joining the SDR and things like that. Maybe in hindsight, 6 months or a year from now, we'll hear more of them come out in stories or things like that. But we're not getting all the truth right now. I mean, it's very obvious in so many different things we're not being told the truth. Okay, well, I want to move on to another area of Bill's expertise. Bill, I understand you are a former NFL wide receiver. We cover on this show corruption and crony capitalism and things like that. I was curious on your opinion of the stadium kickback scheme these billionaire NFL owners have, where they don't put any money down, and yet they get their local jurisdictions, in different cities to build them stadiums, with taxpayer money, and then they collect the profits, and the value of their NFL franchise, doubles every couple years. What's your opinion on this?
Well, Jason, I really hadn't thought about that much. It's a good question. I think, football is such a popular sport in the United States now that these people can get away with things, and it's just been going on for some time. So
that's the chairman of the NFL calling for Bill.
Yeah, they heard me on the phone.
Yeah, Roger Goodell called and said you can't talk about this.
Well, that's I used to play with the Patriots, and the Brady situation it's interesting. You can look at it different ways, but in terms of the stadium thing, I'm just not sure what to say. I mean, it's all I know is that these people can pretty much get away with what they want because of the attraction of the sport.
Yeah, it seems like bread and circus thing, where the politicians fight it, right, and then eventually they give in, and so many people are enthralled with the NFL, like what you said. It's almost a religion for the most part. They spend so much time and energy and money either playing fantasy football or going to games or discussing football at the water cooler at work with their friends and things like that, that they don't look at any of the really important issues that are going on in the economy and things like that. So they spend so much time on reality TV. I actually just came across a story. It's from Korea, about government corruption, and it says, now the Korean government is using celebrity gossip and stuff like that. So when there's a major scandal or something that breaks in their country now, they release, all these celebrity news and to completely change the narrative. So it seems like that's become a popular tool among governments with, sports and celebrity gossip and stuff, that they do that stuff when there's bad news about to be released.
And we're all the more civilized because we don't have gladiators. Bring on the lions.
Well, we're not killing people in the Coliseum yet, like you said. But I mean, they're still bred in circus, though. It's just, we have rules. So even if we have mixed martial arts fighting competitions, there are certain rules so people feel better, that people aren't dying and things like that. But that doesn't mean we're not copying a lot of the stuff that the Romans did in their society. Yeah. So the government and the people in power could basically do whatever they wanted.
Well, you're talking about that kind of stuff, and it goes back to the markets where, here we are, we grew up anti-communist, and we used to rail about their, lack of freedom and the lack of free press and managed society, managed everything, and markets and so on, and look at where we are all these years later. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, people don't realize the lack of free press we have in the United States. I mean, I can speak of that from the GATA standpoint. As I say, they'll talk about, things, reality TV shows, and any kind of news you can think of. But when it comes to what our government's doing, they don't want it discussed. And yet, then hey, we're looking at the communists, and it's unbelievable.
And people should understand that you have literally been told by managing editors and television producers that, we can't cover your stories.
That's exactly right. And we've heard it 3 or 4 times. And from the reporters, and we had reporters say we can't ask these questions of the government, we'd be fired. Bloomberg said we can't mention your name. I mean, we're told this by some good people, and so it's. I mean, I never would have believed that when I started.
Well, we're turning into Atlas Shrugged now. Kind of, Ayn Rand might have been a few decades early, and she was criticized, heavily. Oh, the United States will never become what you're describing in your novel. But she saw this coming eventually, that we would have all these government agencies and all these red tape and rules and bureaucracy and all these things like that. I mean, a lot of United States movies are, there's just so much editing and all these things. And you brought up the mainstream media. I mean, there's so many stories that hit the cutting room floor. I mean, that's why Zero Hedge was created. I found out, I know one of the guys who was involved in one of the initial story guys, and he was one of the assistant producers at CNBC, and he had all these good, honest stories, and they were all being, cut, told, we can't put that on the air. So he started, him and a couple other buddies, started Zero Hedge, and those were the initial content contributors, and that's how Zero Hedge started, was, angry people in the mainstream media who wanted to release stories, they were the assistants or things like that. And, that's how, so I guess that's why we have the internet for now, I guess. The internet is like one of the last places of freedom left for most people.
Well, I was on CNBC right after GATA started in February of 1999, and that was the last time I was on CNBC in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised, Bill. I don't know about you. You brought up Bill Gross earlier in the interview. I was really surprised they let him on for about 90 seconds last week, talking about how all the central banks are manipulating all the markets. I was surprised they actually let him do that.
Yeah, well, he didn't say gold specifically, He spoke generically, so that's why he was allowed to speak.
No, that's right. I mean, but it was still good to see, and we'll see if they have him back.
I don't know. We'll see. He's getting a lot of criticism for that because he's not part of the hopium crowd where, the sponsors of the mainstream financial media, CNBC and Bloomberg, are all the investment banks and the mutual fund companies, and they have, it's always a good time to buy stocks, and it's always a good time to buy bonds, and you should go out there and buy your stock mutual funds and your bond mutual funds, and, just be happy and live life, and you'll be able to retire comfortably in a couple decades. Wink, wink.
Quickly, that's one reason that they're anti-gold. I mean, among the other reasons that they don't make any money from it. So, unlike what you just mentioned, stocks and bonds and different investment plays, gold's a no-win situation for them, really. I mean, they can just chump change at best.
Yeah, plus when gold is doing well, it's like the alarm bell or the canary in the coal mine. It normally means the other asset classes are not going up unless we're in, hyperinflation where all the asset classes are rising. I actually think we're in a crack-up boom now where, all the asset classes are going up except for gold because gold is being managed. But, they're forcing real estate up. They're forcing stocks up in the United States and bonds. And, they've pretty much pegged commodities for the most part, although there's fundamentals for certain commodities like copper and stuff that it was really obvious with the central planning in China that there was way too an oversupply of copper and that was going to crash, at least to me.
Yeah, and we've reached the point of no return as well. The manipulation has distorted markets so badly that it can't be fixed without a crash, most likely. And therefore, the manipulation of gold is all the more important because a crash will be caused by the barometer signaling the alarm. Or at least
a crash is healthier. If you believe in the Austrian school of economics, if you believe in the free market economics, a crash is healthy. The crash is the cure. It gets rid of malinvestment. But all I see right now is malinvestment. Trillions of misallocated capital from central planning. China has misallocated more capital than even the United States, and that's saying something. The United States has misallocated mass amounts of capital. Instead of putting obviously, people should have that money in their pocket instead of taxation and inflation taking it away. But, if they were going to spend the money, it would have been more prudent to spend it on infrastructure or something like that, put bullet trains in the United States instead of propping up these banks with phony accounting and things like that so they could prop up the derivatives market. It would have been better to use it on more productive things so our economy was better. So it's just so much capital globally is just being misallocated. So that's why I think we're in a type of stagflation, even though the commodity prices are dropping. I mean, my bills aren't dropping. So if we were in a real deflation, I mean, wouldn't my bills be falling and wouldn't prices be falling too?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Everything that people need is going up. That's very true.
Okay, guys. Well, I've enjoyed this discussion. We're gonna do the Scumbag of the Week nominees. Let me do mine first, and then Eric, if you have any, you can chime in. And Bill, feel free to comment on some of them if you feel like it. You don't have to though. The first one, I found this guy out like a year or two ago, but finally he got some sensing. He's former California state senator and top gun control advocate Leland Yee. He pleaded guilty in early July to public corruption. He's facing allegations of weapons trafficking, money laundering, murder for hire, and drug distribution. And he has a plea deal and hoping to rat out other people. And the really funny thing about this guy is he was a constant guest almost all the time, at least once a month, on Piers Morgan's show talking about how no American should own any guns. And yet this guy was selling military weapons and guns and things like that. So it's just a normal one of these politicians like Hillary Clinton who, do as I say, not as I do. And he was making millions of dollars, doing criminal activities and buying and selling guns and things like that. When he thinks, ordinary responsible Americans who don't go out killing people, who maybe take their gun and have gun locks or go to the shooting range and things, he thinks we shouldn't own any guns. So just another hypocrite politician scumbag. My next one I have is, there was a big scandal in the United Kingdom. They have a whole bunch of government employees there who are wasting their time and money, just like government employees here in the United States with the Ashley Madison hacking and the other stuff who are visiting porn websites. There was an enormous amount of government employees in the United Kingdom who have been visiting porn websites. They found over 200,000 visits on porn websites. That's 1,300 a day. This is taxpayer money, at its best here, folks. It's just really amazing. And yet we have, a lot of these progressives in this country, Democrats, who are saying, we need more government employees, more government control, more regulation. How many government employees do you know? I mean, the ones I know, I live right outside of Washington, D.C., a lot of them don't work very hard, and all I do is hear stories about, wasted money and corruption and things like that. I mean, in the private sector, guys, and you can comment on this, if you get caught doing a scandal or something like that, something not so bad, maybe you get a warning once, right? Warning about your job. You get caught doing something a couple times, I mean, you're gone right away.
Although it is possible that if the entire federal government did nothing but watch porn, we'd all be better off. Be a little distracted and not cause problems. Less wars being caused, all that good stuff,
It would stimulate the porn industry.
Yeah. Shovel-ready jobs.
It would stimulate the porn industry, but that's about it. But I mean, this is ridiculous, because I always hear the progressives, unfortunately, and not that I like the Republicans really better either, because I think, you know, they're neocons and they want to go bomb people with the military-industrial complex, and they're religious people who want to tell everyone what they can and cannot do. But I mean, the Democrats always say if we had more money and more resources and more moral government employees, you know, basically what Marx wanted, you know, his utopian communist who would sacrifice everything for the public good, that we can go and fix everything and the world would be so much better. I think that's kind of what Bernie Sanders believes in too, which you know, I'm not a big fan of Bernie Sanders. My last one, guys, my last scumbag of the week, and I don't know if you guys saw the Planned Parenthood videos, but you know, there's 3 of them out there. The mainstream media is saying, you know, these videos are doctored, they're from the anti-abortion, so no one should even look at them. But I actually watched one of the videos in its entirety, and I almost vomited. That's how, like, disgusting it was. I mean, if half the stuff in these videos, in my opinion, is true, I mean, there's a lot of lies, and these people are breaking the law at Planned Parenthood. I mean, they're violating federal laws. So what's your opinion here? Is this a symptom, then, of, you know, big government and moral corruption in society? Why do you think, you know, all these government agencies and stuff are spending money and lying and things like that?
Well, simplicity from my standpoint, I mean, look what we found in gold and silver. There's no rule of law. We discussed a little bit about it, about all these fines. Nobody's going to jail. It's, you know, everyone, you know, it's things have gone amok.
It's a process of social entropy. I mean, all empires, the United States is an empire, devolve. You know, the system gets too big, it gets bloated, and it sows its own seeds for destruction, including the erosion of social morals. Even the monetary system, as we've talked about a couple of times, Jason, is promoting that, because we don't have sound money. The nature of commerce and interactions amongst people in society is being debased when the very money that we use, I shouldn't even call it money because technically that's not correct, this fiat currency that's basically created out of thin air and has no tie to the overall production output of goods and services in our economic system now worldwide, is destroying basic fundamental human interactions. It corrupts the system, and really is no surprise to see the bloat of growth in government overall. I mean, progressives would tend to have a knee-jerk reaction against someone like myself making this argument, but the fact is that now we have upwards of 50% of people employed in the United States completely dependent on government at one level or another, local on up to the federal government. So, you know, our very ability to produce goods and services for the betterment of the overall society is now beginning to erode as well. And you can even see that quantitatively in terms of how much output is generated by every dollar that's spent by the federal government. I mean, when we look at the 1960s or whatever, we used to get maybe $4 worth of output for every output that is generated in the economy from activity that is related to government services. Nowadays, there is no multiplier effect. It's negative.
And that's with phony GDP and deflating the real inflation rate and, you know, all these other gimmicks. I mean, well, it's even worse.
That comes in and hiding it. It doesn't, I mean, the system, before you even get to the stage of hiding the bogus reality that's being generated, is just falling apart. I mean, we've got systemic problems that probably won't be fixed until we have some kind of a big crash.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a question of, you know, are we going to crash now or are we going to crash later? So, and I think the people in power have decided, because they can make so much money off the status quo. I live right outside of D.C., so I know all about this with the lobbyists, how much money they make and things like that. That you know, they're gonna postpone this crash as long as possible by printing money, because most people are asleep. And that if, you know, the stock market goes up and the real estate prices go up and the bond market doesn't crash, you know, most people think that everything's hunky-dory or not as bad as it really is, and that, you know, people aren't going to come out with the pitchforks like they did in 2008, because, you know, when they did allow the things to crash, in 2008, that's when the people like me, I wasn't a financial expert back then. That's when I started to wake up and, understand what was really wrong, starting to be wrong with the system, and I wanted answers. So I think a lot of that has changed. But, the future, guys, the future that they have planned, there's this book out, and we did a Welcome to Dystopia podcast on this called Rise of the Robots by Martin Ford. This is the future the elites want, the powers that be. They want robots and automation so they can make more profits and they don't have to pay you your retirement benefits and things like that. And they want, welfare state where they give you $40,000 or $50,000 a year, and God knows what in a decade or two that money would even buy you. With the inflation, with the steady stagflation that we have right now, inflation and taxes going up almost every year. So, it's just really amazing that most people don't even understand how much central planning we have going on, and the people that want to see government control of you from cradle to grave, it's increasing, in my opinion. I mean, look at the stuff that Edward Snowden revealed now. I think there's trolls now that government agencies and things like that hire to post, on websites like USA Watchdog and things like that.
Yeah, and that's a documented fact. It's not some kind of conspiracy theory. A couple weeks ago, I interviewed Ron Paul, and there probably has been no other person sounding the alarm about our financial and monetary system problems than Ron Paul. I mean, he's been able to in cross testimony and with Ben Bernanke in Congress and so forth, and there are a larger number of people who are aware about the problems of the monetary system now than ever before because of people like Ron Paul. But it's probably only 15 million people out of 330 in the United States. I mean, we're
yes, so that's less than 10%, right?
Yeah, we've got a long way to go before.
And 50% of the United States, according to polling, favors socialism and communism and Marxism over capitalism.
Well,
so there's a lot of people that are professional voters out there that want to vote themselves more goodies. So it's another point there about Ron Paul is Ron Paul has been saying for decades that a lot of the progressives and the other people in power at the top, the powers that be, they want a cashless society. But there wasn't the technology to implement that decades ago, and now there is. So it seems to me that, for more control, for totalitarian reasons, for rebellions, bailouts, things like that, that's and to track and to tax every single transaction. That's why we're heading towards a cashless society too.
Well, I guess rounding out the interview, there's one thing that I'd love to ask you again, Bill. I've asked this a couple of times in the last few years. Has there been any change recently, say in the last month or two, in terms of people coming to GATA and saying, hey, you know what? I never believed anything you guys are saying, but now, you know what? You're right. Can we end this out on a positive note where perhaps maybe you see some movement in the direction of interesting thought leaders, so to speak, in the financial community or press or wherever, beginning to surface more so now just because of the lunacy? And, you can see people like Bill Gross making the statements that we were referring to earlier. Those kind of things are happening a little bit more frequently. We had John Hathaway of the Tocqueville Fund commenting about that raid that happened on that Sunday/Monday just 2 weeks ago. I mean, is there momentum building in terms of people's awareness about manipulation in the gold market that you can perceive?
I think privately, yes. Publicly, I mean, it's minor. There's some, but GATA, for example, is still a four-letter word. I mean, you just don't hear it. And it's not crybaby stuff. It's just the way it is. I think certainly many people, understand exactly what's going on. They just don't want to go there. Right? You can use the term cognitive dissonance. And they just don't want to deal with it. I mean, what the heck? If the industry's not going to deal with it seriously, then who else is? And again, as we mentioned earlier, I think when it will really become a big deal is when it blows up. And as Jason said, whether it's sooner or later, we don't know, but it's coming.
Yeah, I just don't see how they can keep this going for that much longer. I mean, China and the BRICS, they're going to want to pull the plug eventually because a lot of those dollars that the U.S. prints, they're exported. I mean, obviously they move a good amount of the inflation that's created. The U.S. moves a good amount of the inflation that's created. It's gone into the asset markets first. So there is obviously inflation in the real world, but it's not hyperinflation levels. and most people don't fully notice it, or they notice their bills are going up, but they blame, the evil, greedy corporations raising prices. They don't understand that, it's not the corporation's fault. They have to raise the prices to stay in business, or they're going to go bankrupt too. But, a lot of those dollars, besides the one in the asset market, they get exported. And that causes inflation, with currency wars, either in Brazil, in Russia, India, China, those places. So I'm just wondering how much longer these countries are aware, because we've heard, statements from the Brazilian central bank about currency wars. We've heard these from foreign central bankers and things like that they're aware of what's going on. I'm just curious how much longer they're gonna take it before they say, what, it's enough. We've set up, the Asian Infrastructure Bank, the BRICS Bank, a new SWIFT system. We're moving completely. We have all these, trillions of dollars in currency swaps with each other, bilateral trade agreements. We're moving to the next system. We're not going to let you guys print all these dollars and just send them to us and not do any hard work anymore and just live off, the old U.S.'s reputation.
Yeah, and that's probably going to evolve. It'll be more a process of evolution over the coming couple of years rather than, some kind of single event. And you can see prima facie evidence in that with the Chinese gold declaration of 1,658 metric tons as but one example. They're still playing ball with the way the international financial system's set up. I mean, this is a lot of people expect that, China and leading the BRICS are going to be some kind of a white knight and a force of reform, but they've got their own levels of corruption. They're not innocent, and they have their own oligarchy and the oligarchical interests that grow out of their power structure as well too. So, odds are it's all going to be an evolutionary process with points of punctuated evolution, as I'd like to say, in relation and tied to market crashes. And, we're at a point now where the Fed is completely in a box and other central banks in the same position. There's really no way out of this. They can't raise interest rates. They can't possibly let them normalize to 5+%. That is historically where they should be relative to inflation, relative to default risk, et cetera. And that arbors for, the form of QE into infinity, as many people have described. So if that's truly a fair description of where we are, that means that the only outcome is a matter of time before we crash, because you can't distort the very fundamental of the price of money and expect to have an economic system run efficiently. At some point, this thing is just as a house of cards, it's going to fall. And who knows, maybe at that point, there'll be a lot more of an aggressive and more assertive move on the part of the BRICS, insulating themselves for their own self-interests. Probably how things will evolve.
And in the meantime, even though they might not officially update their gold reserves, Bill, I think the evidence is overwhelmingly clear that, Russia, India, China, they continue to accumulate massive amounts of physical gold.
Yep, that's where the trend's going, that's for sure.
Okay, Bill, well, I want to thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the Welcome to Dystopia. Please tell our listeners more about Le Metropole Cafe and also GATA.
Yeah, well, on my website, the Metropole Cafe, you can sign up for a 2-week free trial, see if it's of interest. And as far as GATA goes, my colleague Chris Powell does a great job. You go to www.gata.org and get on that mailing list. So there's 2 ways you can go, and hopefully both.
And Bill's being really modest here. I've been a subscriber to Le Metropole Cafe, the Midas newsletter that he writes, for at least 14 years, maybe 13. It's a great forum. He gets a lot of feedback from people that he knows in the industry that he puts into the newsletter, and it's a wonderful looking glass into the precious metals world. And it's well worth taking a free trial to just see whether or not our listening audience wants to check it out. It's a great service.
Talk about growing old together,
Eric. Yeah. I know I hope to at least live long enough to see some kind of resolution of this, but, you never know what that might mean. It might be World War III for all we know.
I just hope that they're not calling me Methuselah by the time this thing ends.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean like Thomas Malthus?
No, Methuselah like in the Bible, like the old guy.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry, I'm not Christian, so I haven't read the Bible. But I just want to thank you again for your time, Bill. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, if you would have told me this would have lasted another 7 years after 2008, I would have been shocked. But, you know, this is what they've happened. They have most of the people fooled, or most of the people don't care, and there's not a lot of negative consequences to the people in power right now printing money. In fact, it's basically the exact opposite. It's perverse. If you're the politician and you try to do the right thing and say they shouldn't print money, you'll probably get voted out of office then, instead of, you know, voting to print more money and give people more freebies. So we have things, the incentive structure in the political system is massively screwed up now, where people aren't thinking long term. They're just thinking about, I guess, the next election cycle so they can stay around DC here and then get a, you know, 7-figure lobbying job.
That's it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again for your time, Bill. I appreciate it, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks, Eric.